Chronic anxiety, hatred of your body, self-doubt, depriving yourself of your true needs, and someone was murdered next door to you. These are all pretty extreme events to overcome. How does a person do that? How do you find a way forward? How do you go forward and look towards the light with all that negativity in your history?
Welcome to Share.Care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.Care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.Care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Share.Care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. And today, it's my great pleasure to welcome Erica Wiederlight as our special guest. Now, Erica is an expert on all things sex, love, and dating. Erica is a certified VITA sex, love, and relationship coach, plus a certified life coach, a Reiki master, and an angel card reader. To get there, Erica overcome chronic anxiety, hatred of her body, self-doubt, and depriving herself of her true needs. Today, Erica is the CEO Mama Bear of We the Light, helping people reclaim their sexual awareness. Welcome, Erica.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fabulous, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. And you've made recently, before for the audience, before we started recording, Erica was telling me she's recently moved from New York down to Florida, so she's got a very big temperature change and a climate adjustment.
It's true. I'm like, whoa.
And talking of adjustments, if we're going to get the audience to understand your journey, do you want to jump in? I think you'll remember this too, the DeLorean time machine, Doc Brown's DeLorean time machine. Do you want to jump in that? We'll hit 88 miles an hour. Go back to what are some of the key challenges that you've faced and have overcome in your life that have led to what you're doing now?
I love that. It's so funny. You were reading my bio, which I wrote, and I'm like, who is that? Like, I forgot. Like, I was like, oh my gosh. So I was like, I kind of, it was great because I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so, it's so interesting. This is a sidebar. We'll get to the past in a second, but it's kind of interesting, like, oh my gosh, how much we overcome and also how we relate to it, so that's a sidebar that I was a little blown away by. But yeah, sure. Let's hop into the time machine.
The Wayback Machine.
Yeah. I'm like, here we go.
Let's go way back.
Yeah. I'm like, here we go. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
I have a country. I grew up in the country, so I can relate to that. I know both kinds of music. We have them, country and western. There's only two kinds, isn't there? So
yes. Oh my gosh. But yeah, I mean, everything you said was my truth, I really was struggling from chronic anxiety. I had a really tough relationship with my body. And actually all of those things are what brought me really to this work. Like I had an opportunity to be like, okay, this is going to take you to a darker and darker place, or this is an opportunity for you to heal and look at this stuff and deal. So as painful and as like, I hate looking back at those times, it really was the turning point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about that, because you went back in your history, you're an actress for, you work as an actress, and you've done that from very early on. Looking at your bio, that seems to be, juxtaposed with this feeling that you have, the relationship with your body as well, because it's a tough industry.
Oh,
It's one of the toughest. I've worked in film and television myself. It's a very, very tough industry, and certainly one that focuses a lot on the visual. So how do we reconcile that you had this anxiety and concern about your body, but you went to work in probably the toughest industry to do with visual aesthetics and personal presentation?
it's funny. When I was in my darkness about it,
Yeah,
I was cool. Like I wasn't cool also, but I thought I was like, yeah, it's okay. I am this, like very cynical and self-deprecating humor.
yeah,
It's when I started doing this work. I remember I was genius at self-deprecating humor, but like funny. It wasn't like
yeah,
like that's awkward. Just like funny, and it was so good. And I remember I started doing this work, and I went for a class. I think it was a class, and they gave
yeah.
me the standard cynical whatever scene, and I like wasn't funny, and it was just because I had time. I was like, I'm not really in the mood to like
Yeah.
rip myself apart. Like I'm in a different headspace. And so I couldn't connect to that work as much. So it was super painful in it. But honestly, once I started doing this work,
Mm.
that's where it really became like, oh my gosh. Again, they're calling me in for, it's not even pretend like, oh, you're coming in for this audition for Catherine. It was like ugly, hideous friend number 2. You're like, cool, 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 great, all right, awesome. So like it's just like it was that I was like that's so when you see that every day coming in, you're like, that was there's no way it doesn't mess with you. Even though people are like, oh, it's just the industry and the standards are so messed up. It's like, yeah, but when you see this every day, it
Mm.
does start to affect you in a way. It does bring up stuff, of course.
Yeah, that's interesting. So was it, like, from that perspective, you say it brings up stuff. Was it something that you went into that field? Was it because, and I wonder that, having worked in that field myself, is it about finding, that external validation? I know for me, for part of my life, I had something missing, and I was always looking for external validation, and in a number of different ways. And I just wonder about that, knowing a number of friends that I've had in that space as well. There was this thing where they needed that external validation. Was that something that you went through from your perspective to start with? Was that a motivation for doing that? Because you do get a lot of attention in the
Right.
film color.
Yeah. It's true. Maybe I started when I was so young though.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
started when I was like 6 years old.
Right. Okay.
And my parents did not, they were like, no, like please. And I was like, no, I want to. And
Uh,
so it
it's a different space.
honestly, it's a different space. So
Yeah.
go older, I could see like, oh, that was cool. It
Yeah.
helped me in certain ways. I'm like, oh, that was cool to get that attention, or that was cool to get that praise. Like I
Yeah.
could see the timeline, but I don't think I had, being so young, I don't think I had the
Yeah.
consciousness. I think for me, when I was so young, it was a way to express myself, and then it totally, morphed into other things.
All right. So the anxiety that you talked about, I mean, you talk about having this anxiety, a chronic anxiety. So that's pretty serious.
Mhm.
I mean, to put that descriptive in front of it, it's not just
Yeah.
anxiety, it's chronic. Where did you think that came from? Was that, so it wasn't, the acting thing was something that you had as a love from as a child, which I understand that. But then to have chronic anxiety, where do you think that came from your perspective?
Oh, yeah, that was childhood.
Yeah.
Childhood and situations that, yeah, how I was, I don't want to say how I was raised, but kind of what I was exposed to, different circumstances. Like anxiety was not even was celebrated. It was kind of what was just like known.
Yeah.
And like that's how, like the underbelly of how we communicated.
Do you want to get into a little bit of that? What were some examples of, where you think that come from? As you're saying, it was from your childhood, if I'm
Yeah.
hearing you correctly. Do you want to get into some specific examples? Because I'm sure audience members will also connect with similar sort of experiences.
Yeah. I think it was really, for me, it was within our family dynamic.
Yeah.
And it was so normalized. Like looking back now, I'm like, oh my gosh, people in our family that I never perceived had anxiety, I'm like, oh, all of those people did, and I'm looking back and I'm like, and we interacted with each other with anxiety. I'm grateful that I actually had friends in high
Yeah.
school. So I had a very traumatic event. I had chronic anxiety for a long time, and then I had a
Yeah.
traumatic event. Um, a few, honestly, but one where this is wild. But my neighbor was murdered.
Oh, wow.
And like
Yeah.
for months, I felt like someone's watching me, and my
Yeah.
mom was like, "There's no way. Like that is. We live
Yeah.
in a suburb. Like that's crazy.
How old were
You're
you?
watching." Probably in my teens,
Yeah.
maybe
Okay.
like 16, 15. And I was like, something is wrong. Something's wrong. Something's wrong.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong. It's like the kid that's like, there's a monster in my room. It's like, there's not a monster in your room.
Yeah.
But there was a monster, you know what I mean? Like and so like there really was.
Yeah.
And so I, had rightfully so, and from other situations too, but like such anxiety. Like I would stand at the garage and watch the garage, like it's closed. It's because they were right there, and I'd be
Yeah.
like, it's closed, it's closed. I would stand there, like, and it turned into like OCD tendencies, like the door's closed, door's closed. I'd have to check my car. Like it became
Yeah.
this thing. But the cool thing is, I had really great friends in high school
Yeah.
that also had their own experiences with trauma. And we openly talked about it. And I talked to a friend recently that didn't go to this school, and I said, we bonded in our anxiety. And they're like, that's so profound. I never even knew of it then. And so I'm actually really grateful that I had friends that were like, I'm having a panic attack. I'm having anxiety. Like I wish we didn't have to deal with that, but I'm grateful that I was supported. I had that community. And one of my friends was the one who was like, hey, this is my therapist. Like that conversation was very normal from an early age, which is kind of cool when you think about it, because that's not everyone's experience.
Yeah. So describe the panic attack, the anxiety attack that you're really, I mean, this whole thing of, as you say, sitting there watching to make sure the garage door is shut. And what does that
Yeah.
feel like inside? What does that, what does that do to you when you're experiencing that? For people, if
Oh, it's
someone had not
horrendous.
experienced this, what would that be? How would you describe that so that they could understand what that feels like?
Yeah, it's interesting. Because sometimes I check myself, like even especially when I go back home, I notice those old feet, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is years old,
Yeah.
and I notice it coming back up.
Wow, really?
Yeah, because it's just like brings back instantly. I'm like, is the garage closed? Is it closed? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting that's back up.
Was
And for
it
me,
like,
it's funny.
was the person, did they come through the garage or something like that? How did the garage connect to that?
I think because it's the most vulnerable, like closest spot
Yeah.
and also they were going around, this is like, they were going around the premise. Everything felt unsafe.
Yeah, okay.
So I think everything was like hot spot, unsafe. You can't trust, like that's kind of the stories. And so for me, it's a real trip, like doing this work and talking to people all day. Like, what do you feel in your body? What sensations do you feel? And then get triggered and be like, you can't even get into that headspace. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't even feel safe to feel your sensations, because when you're so in anxiety, you're like, you're totally ripped out of your body, or you can sometimes experience being totally ripped out of your body.
Yeah, so for someone to come and say to you, "Okay, just calm down and it's okay," and all that kind of stuff is not gonna have any real effect, is it? You probably, the effect is you wanna punch them, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and I'm like, I wish I could, like, especially when you're like, I wish, you're like, I know, but like, I'm not there yet. Like, I'm not there. Like, I know all the self-help, self-soothing things to do, but I'm not in that space just yet. So yeah, it's a real mind trip now, getting transported back, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so weird. Like, I do the opposite of this in my work. So it's interesting to be teleported.
Yeah, no, and that's why I'm asking about this, and I know this is probably a difficult conversation, but I think it's really helpful for people listening that go through this, because you have a lot of advice out there from people that have never been through it. They've read some books and go, this is what you need to do, but they don't understand what it's really like to go through that. And that's where, for someone like yourself who's had that experience, and I said, I understand that this is probably difficult questions, but I think it's really helpful if you are okay to go there. And so talk about, from the perspective, you got this anxiety, as you said, you had friends that had a similar sort of experience. and you guys talked about that. So how did that work? I mean, how did you bring it up, or was it just, part of the girls' conversation? How did that come up, and how did you each support each other?
That's such a good question. I think it was just being such good friends and
Yeah.
being like, "Oh, I have anxiety." And then it's like, "Oh, what's that?" And it's like, "Oh, I have that too." And it was cool because it wasn't like we never sat in it like I actually should talk to these friends now and be like, "That was really cool." We still talk, but it's pretty miraculous. We never like sat in it
Yeah.
and wallowed in it. We're never like, "I'm having anxiety." It was never that.
Yeah.
It was just like, I'm having that. I'm going to, we shared a therapist. I'm going to Dr. So-and-so today. I'm like, oh, cool. So like, it was for me at the time, it was a perfect amount of like being seen, normalizing what was happening, being able to speak about it, and then also like moving through it.
Yeah.
At a young age which is pretty cool to have that support system.
So was that a conscious, because you mentioned about not wallowing in that, and I deal with a number of people where I'm talking to them and they're going through some really traumatic experiences, and I notice a difference in the conversation between some people that are going, okay, I need to resolve this and move forward, and I need to work that out, and other people that just tend to wallow in it and seem to get some sort of enjoyment out of out of being in this dark place and not really looking forward, even though they recognize that they'll talk about this one, that it needs to be better, but then they'll switch back very quickly. Was that a conscious thing that you didn't wallow in it, or what made the difference to not wallow in it and just talk about it with your friends and with an idea of moving forward?
Yeah, it's funny because I actually just earlier was talking to someone that the brain's wants to protect ourselves. The brain's function is to protect ourselves. And so, unfortunately, the brain feels safe for so many of us in the negative because it doesn't feel safe to be like, wow, pause it. So like the brain wants to keep us safe. And usually that is in the quote unquote negative. And so as an adult now, I have to grapple with that of like, hey, I don't want to bypass. I want to feel my feelings. I want to process. I want to digest. But like, am I getting off to the fact that like this sucks? So I have to track like, where are you, Erica? Like, is it appropriate that you're still in the swamp of it?
Yeah.
Or are you like self-indulgent in the swim of it? And it's okay if you're self-indulgent, but like, when are you popping out? As a kid, I just don't think I had the tools and technology. So I almost wonder if it was from a place of just like not awareness and almost shame. Like, what do you do with it? Like, and he was like, oh, thank God they have anxiety too. But like, okay, so I think it almost was like, it wasn't properly digested. But for my head as I wasn't fully an adult yet. I didn't have like my full brain capacity developed. So I was like, I think in my brain at the time, I was like, okay, well, I'll deal with these things in therapy. Like, I'll bring this to my therapist and I could but I was like, I had, we're kids. I had messy, it wasn't even that messy, but like I was messy. My actions weren't as clean because I didn't know how to process and digest it, So it's like that plus hormones plus all the things. Like I didn't know really what to do with it. Except bring it to therapy, kind of voice it to that group that felt safe. And then I did what I did best at that time, which isn't the best, but what I could do best then was kind of avoid, and be like, okay, well, we're going out with friends. I'm not going to like, how can I kind of like, so now I'm like, oh, I'm seeing that I was a little avoidant. I'm seeing that I was a little this, but that's kind of at the time the best I could do with the set of tools I had. And I try to have compassion for that version of myself.
Yeah, because I was just wondering, as you were talking about, there's a couple of things you mentioned there, with one being a kid, and kids tend to have a little bit more optimism in life than some adults. I will say, not all adults, but some adults. It's like kids don't know that life sucks. If you look at kids in Africa that will play on a dirt ground with a rock because that's what they know, and they fun of that, that they don't have a comparison to say that. And I was wondering whether part of that, your processing of that with your friends, was not having that mindset of, because you're all experiencing some sort of trauma that you were talking about, it was like, okay, we've got that, we've still got our life, we've still got, and I was just wondering if there was some level of gratitude as well that was at play there, because we know that gratitude has a really positive effect on our life. I was just wondering, was that part of, fundamentally under that, where you say, you talk about, you avoided it, and you had a place where you could deal with it because you had therapy, so you had a safe place where you could deal with it, so you could compartmentalize it and go, I'm with my friends now, we can go out and have fun because I've got a place to deal with that later. Do you think that might have been part of that process as well?
It was, especially I was very fortunate to grow up in a very privileged area, and my parents did not, especially my mom, did not come from that. And so she was in consistent reminder of, this is not how everyone, like, we were very aware of every other person's, like you're saying, like, this is not, some people get a rock and they're happy, and they're genuinely happy, and you have this. So we were very I guess, like, I don't even want to say, it wasn't even religious, it was more like faith, spiritual, about like gratitude, and being so grateful. So I think I was like, wow, this is horrendous that I'm having so much anxiety, and I held both. It was nuanced. Like, I'm holding this anxiety, and wow, what a privilege that I have these friends, and I get to have the privilege of going to, it wasn't in spite of one another, but okay. And then I also get to go to play practice. So it was a nuanced, you know what I mean? Like, but the Cliff Notes is, yes, I think I wouldn't at the time know it was called gratitude, but sure. I think I was like, oh, I do have a very blessed life. I also have anxiety, and I have a blessed life.
Yeah. And you can imagine that trauma of, someone being murdered next door would be really, really, something that does impact you greatly. But at the same time, because I'm trying to work out where this balance is between people that go from, stuck in that self-wallowing thing, whereas you seem to have a balance. It was traumatic and you needed to deal with that, and that's correct way to address that, but you had a way of dealing with that. You also had a foundation of friends that were supportive. And it sounds like you had a foundation of growing up where you recognize, as you say, your mum didn't have that. Because I look at that from my own perspective. My grandparents lived initially, they were war refugees after World War II, coming out to Australia, and lived separate for a long time, and then in a 2-room, not 2-bedroom, but 2-room house that my granddad built with a dirt floor. That was, and so when I look at my troubles, sometimes when I think I've got troubles, I remember that, and I go, maybe it's not so bad. So it was interesting to hear how that, even though you, as you say, you used the word blessed, and that seemed to be, was that the way that you talked at that time? It might not have been, as you say, it wasn't gratitude, but you used blessed. Was that something that was used a lot when in your growing up?
Probably, I'm thinking back to it, I'm tracking it. My dad is a very, really did speak a lot about how fortunate we were. But like I said, my mom, even now, will be like, oh my gosh. And she's like, don't they, it's my mom, and especially my grandma, who came over from Italy, and just had a horrendous, trying life. And she was the happy, you're like, this makes no sense. Like, this woman had, like, are you kidding me? Like, she should be.
Sounds like my babcha.
Right? Like, granted,
you
as a
ask her
state,
something,
like,
she goes, I no complain.
Yeah, you're like, what? Like, what? And like, just had trauma after trauma, like, just it was relentless, and still had a tremendous amount of faith, and like faith that the planet is good and people are good. And so
where
that
do you think that comes from? Because I mean, I look at it, say, from my perspective, my grandmother on my dad's side, my babcha, I'm Polish, Russian, and Ukraine, so I integrate. So I could probably be the peace talker over there at the moment. I'm fully integrated.
Yes.
And but what I look at is my grandmother, to put it in context, I won't go through all her life, but I think she was 14 or 15. She was abducted by Nazis. She was walking home. They grabbed her off the street, threw her into a truck, sent her to a labor camp. God knows what happened there, being a young female. And she never complained about her life. And she had a whole bunch of things like that. So what do you think that is, that people that go through that just get on and because she never complained about life. That was her statement. When you ask her, how are you going? She goes, I no complain. It's like, and she gets on, and she was always, making these wonderful dinners, and having an Italian background, there's always, these wonderful food around and things like that. We had the similar sort of thing. But what is it, do you think, that makes that difference for people where they, they go through these trauma, but they look on the brighter side of life?
I think it could be such a nuanced conversation. Like, I think there's so many layers to it.
Yeah.
I'll speak for one piece of it, is I think it gives you perspective.
Yeah.
This is a silly example. I remember my grandma, for one reason, I don't know, it was her hip or something, but she was in the hospital, and we brought, not thinking, we're like, whatever, we brought her a hamburger, a normal hamburger. Yeah. And she started crying like, and went on and on, this is so beautiful. Look how big the bun is. I'm like, it's a freaking hamburger. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, come on. Yeah, like, eat it, grandma. But like, it was so, had so much, I guess, gratitude for the moment that, like, she made it. And this is, I later found out she filled out a book for us, like, one of those books, those memory books. Yeah. And you would never know this, but her favorite song was I Will Survive. Oh, and I'm like, wow. And because she was not like a flashy person like that, but I'm like, that makes sense. I really feel like for her, because she survived so many trials and tribulations, those little things, she was like, please, like, she really had perspective. And my mom and I talk about this a lot. I think for her, I'll just speak for her, faith was a huge, and whether that's faith in traditional God, whatever it could be. I even say people that, I'm like, even if it's your cat Fluffy in the sky, or something bigger, or love, like, it doesn't have to be, like, anything,
well, we have that with Share.Care. One of its principles is find your source of strength, and whether that is God or music or whatever it is, what gives you strength. So it can be, I love that fluffy cat in the sky. That's awesome.
Right. If you're like, I love my cat Fluff, and like, I'm like, great. Like, it doesn't have to be, it could be goddess, it could be spirit, it could be, I'm just going to try to be a good person. Like you said, that North Star. Yeah. I think she had such a tremendous amount, like I said, gratitude that she got through the other side, but also faith in something bigger. That really her faith, because if you don't have, I mean, my mom talked about this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm becoming like this, spiritual person. But like, if you don't,
I quote my parents all the time now as an adult, and I go,
I'm like, oh, I don't, like, no, not this. But like, it's true. It's like, if you don't have faith, it's hard. Things it becomes hard if you feel really lonely and alone. So if you don't have faith in something bigger or love, or it becomes tough. So I think for her, it was a combination of faith, gratitude that she's here to tell the freaking tale and she can eat the hamburger, and she just had a lot of appreciation for what she did have. Yeah, I think I think it's a nuanced conversation, but you hear that a lot with survivors.
Yeah, and is it really in that mindset? Do you think it's that simple? Is going, okay, I'm going to have faith that this is okay, and maybe it wasn't a conscious choice. And because I look at my bubcho, she wasn't. I don't think she made a conscious choice to do that. It was just something that was ingrained either from her upbringing, from her parenthood early, from her childhood early in life, or something like that. But she just had that mindset that, having that faith. I mean, she was Polish, so strong Roman Catholic upbringing, maybe lots of guilt that you had to have that mindset. I don't know. I'm a little bit facetious when I say I can't be Catholic anymore because I don't feel guilt. But but do you think it is as simple as, having that mindset, whether you were brought up with that or you actually choose to do that later in life?
That's a good question. Again, I think it's nuanced, because I'll just speak from her, and I'll speak for myself too. Like, my relationship to faith, which is so different. Like, her relationship to faith was very religious. My relationship to faith is very spiritual. Yeah. For me, I personally can't just jam off of everything happens for, like, like, it doesn't do enough for, I'm like, cool. Like, that could get me somewhere.
Yeah.
But for me, my faith conversation, why it's so helpful is community. Like it's it's the practice of it. So it's not just like the mindset of like everything's going to work out.
Yeah.
That might do for some people, and that's awesome. But for me, where it really is rich is like the practice of it, being in that gratitude, having the community. Like that's where, I guess, faith, if you will, has a part in my life. Is like me living that.
Cool. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense.
Yeah.
And as you say, it is quite nuanced because it's different for every person. And that's why we're trying to understand how people do find this gratitude mindset. Because, I mean, we know people that are grateful seem to have better, or not seem to, they do have better lives. There's so much research that supports that. But I'm just wondering how we get to that. If you haven't grown up with that, I said, looking at my babcha, she was, I believe she grew up with that. I wasn't there around and when she was younger, but she always had that attitude. And a lot of people that I know that have that, they had that from younger in life. Some people have made that transition. But I was just wondering, is it as simple as that? And something I'm trying to understand. But like you say, it's a nuanced conversation.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, how did you deal with that? You've gone and you're obviously seeking help to do with the anxiety. And you talk about hatred of your body, self-doubt, and deprive. Well, we'll get into the needs later, but those three, you've got chronic anxiety, hatred of your body, self-doubt. Describe us through that process of coming out, because I'm taking it now. It's very limited, if at all, in your life that you have those, and certainly not to the extent you had before. Describe the journey out of that.
Totally. So I think it was. Even like hearing it, I'm like, darn, that's heavy.
That should be in the dictionary. That should be a word in the dictionary.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my God, feels horrible. But yeah, I think because it was so much at once, like that is so heavy to be dealing with body issues, to be dealing with anxiety, like that's just so much. Cliff notes too is I had I laugh because I've seen so many. This is a sidebar. My ADD is taking me here, but I've seen so many.
I've never been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I suffer heavily.
I'm like, and just shiny object.
I put it down to I'm a Leo. If you're into astrology, so I'm like shiny thing. Oh, let's go there. Oh, wait a minute, that's fire. Come back.
I know, I'm like, woo! But I always laugh because I've seen, so many thought leaders talk about like that, inciting moment that like everything changed. And I remember being like, that's not true. And now I'm like, oh my God, I'm like embarrassed, but I have such a quintessential story of like my come to Jesus, so I'm like, oh my God. But it's stereotypical, but it's true. So I had a year in my life where, honestly longer than a year, but it was like the chronic anxiety was building up. I was dealing with a pretty bad eating disorder, breakup. I had 3 friends pass away in 1 year, and my mom was diagnosed with cancer. So just like LOL at like absolutely relentless. Yeah. Like relentless. Year from hell. Yeah. Year from hell. And so do you say like, my nose was kind of like put to the stone. You know what I mean? Like, what are you going to do with this? And I actually started the journey. Which is interesting because I'm like such a, as you could tell, like, what? Like, I've always been like hyper and like all over the place. And I used to it's funny because I used to, as a kid, when there was VCR, I would make my mom. I remember VCR.
We're definitely in the Wayback Machine now.
Exactly. People are like, what is that? But I would make my mom.
I have a 14-year-old son who has no idea what a CD is. So.
Yeah, like.
Let alone VCR.
Exactly. And it was horrible that you had to rewind it physically.
You got a fee if you didn't take it, if you didn't rewind it.
Yes. You're like sitting there, like, come on. But I remember, so like very hyperactive, as you know, like theater kid, like all over the place. And I remember this was before it was cool, like so before it was cool. I would make my mom take me to like organic shops, which was like not a thing. There was like one every few hours, because like that was not cool back then.
There was no
And I'd
farmer's
make her
market.
right. It was like that. That's like not cool, at the time. And
Yeah.
I'd make her take me there.
It was
and I'd
hippie.
pick up. It was so hippie. My mom's like, "Are you kidding me?" And I'd make her get me yoga VCRs.
Okay.
So the Cliff Notes is I say, oh, this is so random, but this journey has always been in my consciousness. Like to think about a child in their room doing yoga to a VCR is kind of like a very hyperactive child.
Yeah.
It is. I'm like, oh, it makes sense. Like I've always.
You were privileged though, because we didn't have a VCR. I didn't have a VCR in my room ever. So,
oh yeah, exactly. To be like, I want a yoga, and to even know what yoga is. You know what I mean? Like that's such a blessing.
Cool.
Yeah. And that she was down for it. I think she was like, please don't make me, but okay, fine. If it calms you down. But
why are you watching porn like other kids?
Right. And I'm like, oh, she's like, why is my 6-year-old like doing, a yoga session in her room? But so the funny thing is I was like, oh, this is so random, but I've always been attracted to this work since I was a kid. And so when she got diagnosed, you go into, oh my gosh, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do mode?
Yeah.
And so I just started gobbling down information like holistic health, life coach, all this stuff. And like, I got my life coaching certificate as like a LOL, I'm never going to use this. Yeah. This is for me to give to her. And so like it was.
How old were you when you did that?
Maybe 21.
Yeah, just curious because I mean, from my experience, I was in the army when I was between 18 and 25, and on my holidays, I flew across the country. I took 2 weeks off for my annual leave and studied neurolinguistic programming. That was my annual leave. So I was just curious to know if you had that. You're 21, you're studying all this kind of stuff, and yeah. So I'm trying to understand that mindset. Maybe it's ADD. We are ADD. We all need to get together because we're all studying this stuff.
It's true. It's so true. It's so true. But I never had. I was like, I'm dead set on being an actress. Yeah. So that's why I was like, I never had it. I was like, this is not a business, and you'll laugh because I was getting so much information, as you know, that I just started having people over at my apartment. I was like, okay, I'm not doing this as a business, but let me tell you what I learned. And then it started, and I'm like, oh no. So like it started accidentally.
So you were the pre MLMer. You're bringing people, the Avon lady bringing people to your house.
But I didn't charge them, so at least I feel like a little bit better.
You set the precedent. I love it.
I'm having pyramid schemes in my New York City apartment, but that's
come over. I'll teach you yoga. It's good for your body.
They're like, oh God, what's Erica up to now? But so it never was in my consciousness. Oh my God, consciousness.
I have that. English is my second language, and I don't have a first, so it's like
I'm like, am I okay? So it was never there. It just, and my mom's health was just the catapult for all this, and then it spiraled and snowballed from there.
Yeah, wow, that's pretty impressive. And so you can, like, to help your mum. That was the motivation to learn all these different things, and then not only are you helping your mum, but you're helping everybody in the neighborhood and probably in wider neighborhood as well. It's like, come over to Erica's and your life will be better, and we'll start this Whole Foods type thing and eat well. I love that. So how did it morph into, because you've gone off and I know you've worked as an actress and you've had an acting career. How did you transition from that to actually, because you said you didn't start it as a business, it was just purely to help people and as a gift to people by the sounds of it. How did you then transition that into a business?
Really accidentally. So like I was doing it on the side, and then I was like, oh, I'm like coaching. Oh, like it's really kind of and I really was like, it's $5, but like it hit me over, like everyone's like, okay, but
you're getting lots of value for that.
Yes, it had to like hit me over the head, and I still was doing, and I still here and there sometimes do voiceovers and stuff, but I was still doing both. And for me, I always have an interesting relationship with acting business. And in the last few years, it's just like, I love acting. That will always be a thing for me.
Yeah.
But like, this is where my energy is
Mm.
right now. Also, like, it's different, but like, I am getting my fill in a way, like conversations like this. But yeah, I really had to feel into it. It's like, the soul of the business kind of, came through storming. You know what I mean? Like, came storming through. Like, I was like, like, I had no intention of this. And it kind of snowballed, which is interesting.
Well, do you want to talk about that, like from your experience of acting and how that has helped your business? Because I know from my perspective, you know, it was something else I did when I was in the army. I actually went to acting school then in my time off. I had a lot of time off. And I actually happened to be at the same school as Hugh Jackman before he was famous. So I've even got pictures of him before he looked like Wolverine. He was like a little skinny guy. We were there at dinner having, you know, and so that's one of my little stories. But I found, you know, through that process, because I'd studied writing, directing, and did a whole lot of those things, and that actually became very helpful later. In particularly, I mean, even doing things like this podcast, all those skills came through. Do you want to talk about that experience and how that translated to what you're doing now as well?
Yeah, totally. So especially logistic wise, I love coaching. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
And for me personally, it's not my end all be all. Will I do it forever? Probably. I love it. Yeah. For me, where I'm like, yes, I am most alive, you're not going to be surprised, is the public speaking aspect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm like, oh, this makes sense. You know, so like, I love talking to people one-on-one. I love leading groups, but like, for me, hire me for a corporate event or, you know, and to do, give me a microphone. And I'm like, yes, you know, like I am alive. Yes. I'm like, thank God. So that's how it's correlated. It's also given me, you know, the courage, the freedom to take up space. You know, like, you have to take up so much space when you're auditioning, and you know, people have just seen 4 million other girls that look like you. You know, they've been in the audition room for 6 hours, and they're like, here's another one. Like, they don't care. They're disengaged. They're on their phone. They're like, okay. So be willing to like not take it personal, to be grounded, to take up space has been so helpful here too. Like in these spaces, I've been like, okay, like, it's taught me so much.
Yeah. Because what I'm really interested in that part of it too is you've started, you know, 6 years old, you want to be an actress. Hadn't thought about being a coach at that age, and it wasn't until later that you know, even when you were doing coaching, helping people, you hadn't thought about it as a business or a career. And the point that I wanted to get across to the audience is, and if you can expand on this, is these translatable skills that you don't need to know everything where you're going to be at the end, at the start. You know, I have this conversation with my son. He's 14 in year 9. I'm not sure where that translates to in the US. So he's got 4 years of high school to go before he goes off to university. And I asked him, what do you want to, you know, do you know what you want to do with his life? And he goes, no, don't know yet. And I went, that's cool. You've got time you can work it out. I know you'll be capable to do whatever it is you want to do. And when I look at my life, there's so many different things that I did, different careers that I did, and it all culminates and builds up to support whatever you're currently doing now. Well, that's my experience. But was that your experience as well? And just for people that are listening to this pressure, because you talked about anxiety, this pressure to know, I've got to know what I've got to do. But, you know, from my perspective, I don't think you do. I think you can work it out as you go, and you know, you can you know, those skills then translate to later things as well. So everything's beneficial. Is that your experience as well? And what would you advise to people in those spaces where they're going, I've got to work it all out now?
Yeah. I also, for me, I hope that, I mean, I would be so upset if this was my last stop. You know what I mean? So I'm like, I would be like, no, please, there's more. So, and you know, that has its pros and cons, but like, even at this stage, I'm like, oh, this is just the beginning. You know what I mean? Like, I love this. I feel so grateful that I've had all these incredible experiences, and I'm just getting started. And so everything, like if you look at my path,
Yeah.
it makes no sense. You know what I mean? Like if you looked at my work on a resume, like
Yeah.
but I had to go in with the mentality of, I can either go in the mentality of lack and be like,
Yeah.
"Ooh, you don't have a tradition. You went to school for theater. You know,
Yeah.
like you don't have a traditional. You're done. You're screwed. You know what I mean?" Or I could look at it as, I have so much life experience, and so what I'm trying to get at is, if we are down to be students of life,
Yeah.
we're chef's kiss. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't know. I really do think about. It's so not fun when we're just like, destination, destination, destination. Like
Yeah.
it sounds corny, but it is so the journey. Like it
Yeah.
is so, and at least for me, I don't want a career, even if I had a corporate career, that I do the same thing. I wouldn't want to be stagnant. I always want to keep growing and showing up and evolving and changing and pushing myself in different ways.
Yeah, I love that because, I mean, I really think there's a fair bit of anxiety out there of you've got to follow this set path. And I know people and friends of mine that have got children, they're quite put a lot of pressure on the children. Oh, you've got to do this, got to do that. And it's like, well, life is. I love that we live in today's time because there's so much diversity, and diversity is really accepted. It's like you can have any path that you want, and that's okay. And it sounds like that's a message that you're sharing as well.
Yes. I remember even years ago, like when I was doing this, people were like, "Oh no." Like they were like, "What is she do?" You know, my friends that had like very cool corporate jobs, they were like, "Oh, she's like going through something."
She's
And
one of
now it's like,
those.
yes, she's an entrepreneur. And now it's like, and I'm like, "Oh." And now it's like, so we're in such a great time where it's like that is totally acceptable and cool. And yeah, I think this is an awesome time for us. Even if you're like, it doesn't feel safe to do something
Yeah.
totally out of the box, and I want to be in corporate, cool. It's like, okay, you're in corporate, awesome. Like, how are you going to challenge yourself within that? Like, how are you going to, I don't know. I think it's for me, and everyone's different. It feels stifling to put a desire on myself for the rest of my life in regards to a career.
Yeah, I find it interesting how it changes, because if you go back 30 years and you had multiple jobs, it'd be like, oh, you're so insecure. But now, if you've got one job, it's like, what, no ambition?
Right. It's so true.
It's funny, but then we come back to, and this comes back to what you're talking about as well. You've got to find your own path. If you want to have that one job for the rest of your life, if you're comfortable with that and that's right for you, then that's what you should do. How do you, I mean, as a coach, how do you encourage people to find their right path? And this is coming back to what you talked about. You found, you were depriving yourself of your true needs. How did you then move towards, talk about, what caused you to deprive yourself of your true needs, and then, how you actually decided to do what was right for you?
I love that. Yeah. I'll also tackle, like you said, everyone's needs are different. So when I am coaching someone like me that's like, "Hey, teach me how to have a wild path." I'm like, "Great, got you." And someone's like, "Hey, it would feel really safe for me to have the same job for the rest of my life." I'm like, "Great. Like, let's get behind that."
Yeah.
And so for me, I was so looking outward and kind of like checking everyone else's needs and being like, "Yeah, me too." And honestly, like the bottom line is, I was like, same. It's like, what are you talking about?
I love that person. Yeah, me too. I need it.
I'm like, yeah. And then it's like, you actually want that? No, but everyone else has it. Like what? But in regards to needs, I think it was a worthiness deserving thing.
Yeah. Okay. You didn't feel that you deserved it, or?
Oh, no. And especially, I think this can sometimes be the underbelly of like a healer or a space holder or a facilitator.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm good. Oh, let me hold space for you.
Yeah.
And so I was like, no, I work on this on my own. I'm okay.
Yeah.
And so I never really got good with and that's still something that I have to honestly monitor, because I'm really good at being like, "Oh, but my clients, oh, but this conversation," like I'm good at ripping myself out of my body and going outside.
Yeah.
I have to like continuously cultivate and curate like going back in and be like, what do you need?
Yeah.
Because that's not a conversation we're good at. Like, you know what I mean? That's not a conversation that we're exposed to or celebrated, really.
How do you find that? How do you find what you need? Like, and I've heard some people talk about, solitude is a way of doing. That's not, putting solitary confinement. From my experience, for my solitude, I've turned into a bit of a Forrest Gump. I have a large lawn, and I bought myself a self-propelled lawnmower, and I just go out there, and even when it probably doesn't need to be mowed, sometimes I just need that space, and I go out and I mow my lawn, not listening to any music or anything like that, and just mow. That's my space with my thoughts, and I do that. How does how would is that solitary a need for you, and was that something that you did, or how did you find that space to really get to know yourself and what your needs were?
That's a good question. Yes, I'm a big, I hate to even calling it spiritual, but like spiritual practice person. So like
Yeah.
I try to have that every day,
Yeah.
because as you can imagine, I'm like, like this is my energy all day long. And
Yeah.
I am, I'll admit I'm like a busyness addict. I'm like, let me
Yeah.
record 4 podcasts. Let me talk to 35 people. So like I'm like, my patterns are so habitual.
Yeah.
So like I have to track myself deeply because I don't even notice I'm doing it, but I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, you work from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. You're so cute. Like I know it, like it's habitual for me. So for me, it's A, carving out that quiet time, but B, getting realistic with my structure. I like to overbook myself, which is, it's not the best.
Yeah.
So I have to set, like in between each call, I have to be like, oh, what do you need? Like in between this call right before, I was like, I should do this, this, and this. And I'm like, I'm not okay. Like I need to sit on the couch and drink water for 5 minutes and self-soothe. And so it's, yes, I need that solitude, but I also need to, within the constraints of a crazy life, which we all have, I've had to get good at checking in with myself consistently and like inner parenting myself, being like, hey, what do you need? Hey, like I relentlessly ask myself, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Like it's obnoxious, but I'm like consistently checking in.
Well, that's an important point, though, to be asking yourself, because then it prompts the answer as well. But how did you know? What was it, from this process of, you must have felt something that you were denying yourself of your true needs. But then how did you know that you'd found, how did you know it was right for you? Because people go, find yourself. But how does a person know that they've found themselves?
Oh, I love that. Well, I actually am going to go off of what you were first. I was like, so I knew the needs were crunchy so I did a program that I'm obsessed with, this work, and it was all about desires and pleasure. And so it was like thriving city.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, I desire, pretend I'm making something up. I always say this. I desire to go to the Amalfi Coast.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, great. But like, Erica, and I said this, I recently talked about this. Like I have these outlandish desires. Like, oh, I desire to win at the time, I desire to win an Oscar and this and this and this. Okay, cool. But like needs, I would go with me on this. Like I was noticing if I was at dinner with people and I had to go to the bathroom, I'd be like, oh, I'll just hold it.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is like, I had these outlandish desires, but these primal basic needs are like, I'm dehydrated. I'm not taking care of myself. I'm not sleeping. It was like such a disconnect of you're not taking like that, because the desires, because the pleasure was so outlandish and wild, it helped me notice like, ooh, you're not even taking care of your primal needs.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh shoot, like I can't really go to the Amalfi Coast if I'm not even like drinking enough water. You know what I mean? So like that helped me kind of regulate and prioritize. I know that's a tangent, but like that helped me prioritize those needs.
I love that, though, but what you're talking about there is those primal needs. Is if you can't take care of them, how can you have that bigger picture? It's talk about, and finance is a good example, well, a tangible one that people can relate to. They go, I want this big house, but I can't manage my daily budget, or can't manage my weekly income. So how do you get that? There's a disconnect there. Get the foundation right and move forward. That's really profound what you've said there. Actually, it's caught my attention. You say it's like, I'm not even taking care of my primal needs of needing to go for a wee. How can I plan this holiday?
Right. And really briefly, like, think about, I mean, especially this month, like, everyone is talking about manifesting vision boards. Like, I'm all about it. Like, put the white Mercedes on the vision board.
Mm.
But like you said, you're like, oh, white Mercedes, white Mercedes. But if you get $10 and can't manage it properly,
Yeah.
like, there's a disconnect. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm obsessed with the vision boards. I'm obsessed with the manifesting, dream big. But if for me, that really showed me, oh shoot, I'm so out of whack that like I'm not even eating and sleeping properly. And yet like there's such a disconnect there. And I think, like you said, that the money example is super helpful with that.
I think that's a great sales pitch that attracts people in, because I remember that when I was I think I was 19 and then had that experience of going, oh, you know, do this and go and get the experience. So I've gone and got into a suit, gone to the BMW place. I'd actually booked in and rang in, turned up in a suit to drive a 7 Series BMW to get that experience, because that was going to motivate me. It didn't, because I didn't have my foundation right. It was I was doing all these things, and missing all the stuff that needed to be there to actually just basic budgeting. There was no way I was going to have the money to afford back then to afford it. Because I as much as I wanted this, I was still going out every night, you know, with my friends, drinking and having, you know, great time, which is, you know, nothing wrong with that. But there was a disconnect between driving this BMW and you know, and I'm pretty sure the salesperson knew when I turned up that I wasn't a serious buyer, but he went along with it anyway. So I just wonder if we need to get that focus and go, hey, to have this, you can have all this, but if you actually take care of the things you need to take care of, that will take care of itself. Yes.
Really quickly, you sparked something within me. I remember and which so many of us get into, like I was relentlessly overspending on courses, like manifesting courses and this and that. And I was like, yes. And it was such a disconnect, because I was spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on personal development, but I didn't have the finances to upkeep it. And I just want to throw that back. And also what we're talking about really is nervous system regulation. Yeah. And I'll throw this here, like we can dream up having the BMW, having the Mercedes, but if our nervous system can't hold it, we can't hold it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So pretend we were, it'd be like, ah! So part of this work is, yes, dream it up. Yes, know what you're working towards, but also like, I'm going to make sure my needs are taken care of, but I'm going to make sure that like, I am self-soothed, I am self-regulated enough that like I feel safe to hold and to bring in good things, you know?
Yeah. That's interesting that you mentioned that, because I mean, I come from very humble backgrounds, as I mentioned before, you know, war refugee and with nothing. And well, not me personally, but my grandparents, and growing up, I didn't have a lot. But I've also had the good fortune later in life to be around people that are massively wealthy, you know, from a monetary perspective. And when I've got to know them, it was interesting. It was never for them. It was never about the money. They were whole people first. They were giving people first. And through that, because they're all self-made, the ones that I've met, they actually then, and it's never about, yes, they've got lots of flashy things, but that's just because they like them, not because of who they are, that they need that to fulfill and project, you know, something that's missing. It was interesting to understand that you need to be whole first, and then the rest of it takes care of itself.
Yes. Yeah. That's so beautiful. And that's the way to do it too, without it. Like, that's a beautiful way to be like, I feel so held. I feel so resourced. Like, these are cherries on top. This is not these things are not my being, you know?
Yeah, I have little snippets that I don't watch a lot of TV, but there's certain shows that I do watch and I like. And there was a show called The Orville, which was out. It was a space show. I'm into sci-fi. And I'm a nerd. I'm super nerd, and I'm proud of it. And they talked about, you know, there was this society that didn't have a lot of, you know, it was like our world now, but it's set in, you know, our world being couple 100 years in the future where all this is resolved. And the girl was talking about, she goes, if we had all this, we wouldn't have that. And the other lady on the show from the future said, no, you got to flip it. When you are right inside, then you have all that. And it's, from my perspective, even when I look at my own life, as soon as I was okay. Everything else took care of itself.
Yes.
So yeah, it's just a fascinating how we look out and go, oh, if we have this, it's going to fix it. And the example coming back to money is because it's a tangible way of relating to it. How many people win lotto, win millions and millions of dollars? A few years later, they've got none again.
Yep.
Very few people hold on to it because they're not right inside.
Yeah.
Coming back to you, because this is about you.
ADD.
Exactly. I told you I haven't been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure.
It's good. It's fun though. It's good side topics.
Getting back into what you do primarily, because you and this is one of those coming back to basic needs. I mean, you work and you're a coach in sex, love, and relationships. Now, some of those are quite taboo topics to talk about in some worlds. I kind of don't relate a little bit in that sense because when I was very young, my mum actually had some books on sex and this is how it works and reproduction. And so when my friends as a teenager were talking about, oh, let's go watch some porn, I'm like, it's just sex. What's the big deal? But it seems to be such a taboo topic and an area some people have difficulty with and relying with. Talk about your transition into that field, and let's explore that if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I mean, talk about kicking and screaming. Because I was kicking and screaming, probably actually more, but I was kicking and screaming towards doing the life coaching.
Yeah,
I was like, do I really want to do this? But like really kicking and screaming towards confidence, sexual empowerment. And I still am. I mean, I said this recently, like it's all great, like when you're in the communities, and I've been so lucky to be in communities that do this work. And, when you're in your trainings, you're like, oh yeah, like I can't wait to teach the masses. But then when you're out there on your own teaching the masses, and then you go to a wedding from someone from high school, is like, so I hear you're doing sexual empowerment. You're like, oh my gosh. So like, you're like, oh no.
So you're really out there. It's like, Erica's off doing
that. Yes. So that's why I'm like, okay. So that too. And I still am honestly grappling with that. Like I've changed many times because for me, and all my clients will say this, like, yes. Do we talk about sexual empowerment? Yes. Do we talk about confidence? Yes. Do we talk about love? Yes. But for me, it's, everything's interconnected. Yeah. So it really is a holistic view of how we're showing up, how we're living, how we're doing all the things. But honestly, even myself, I've gone back and forth around like, do I want to claim I'm a sexual empowerment coach? Do I just want to be a confidence coach? Like I too have gone through so many different and I probably still will. Like I still am toggling with it. I'm like, because sometimes it's so, because it's so, some people are like, tell me about it. And some people are like, I'm so triggered, get away from me. You know what I mean? So it's something that I'm consistently trying to relate to.
Because I find it's a fascinating area because, I mean, as far as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sex is up there with food, oxygen. And if you look at it from a biological perspective, that drive to continue the species is fundamental. Otherwise, we become extinct. So it's from that side of things, it's just a natural thing that people need to do. But also, too, if you're going to then take the biological thing a step further in a relationship, it's a massive expression of people's connectedness to each other. I mean, two people in flow with each other, making love is something that's, when you're really connected with the person that you're with, it's hard to describe unless you've experienced that. And it's hard to compare that to anything as far as a complete whole experience between spiritual, emotional and physical. It brings it all together. So from that side of things, how do you reconcile that for people? And then obviously there's some people that go, I don't want to talk about it. And that's fine. I mean, that's okay.
Yeah.
But for the people that do want to talk about it and that are looking for that space as to have that, this bliss is the only thing I can compare it to from my experience anyway. It's just like there's nothing that compares to that level of bliss that when you're fully connected with someone in that moment. How do you help someone along those paths?
Yeah, I think for me, why I was so attracted to it was sexuality holds so much.
Mm.
Even the trauma, the shame.
Mm.
So like we can be thriving in business and money, but there, like we said before, like there's a thriving and there's need. So
Yeah.
you feel so often we hold so much stuff around sexual empowerment and our sexuality. And so for me, I'm like, that is a huge part of our being. And you can't be fully confident. You can't be fully radiant if you're holding so much internalized shame about your body and you're making yourself so wrong. So for me, that's why confidence is so connected to my work, because I was so like I said, I was in therapy for years, and I like harassed this woman about my eating disorder. Like, and I was, I harassed her, which was like enough. And for me, it helped, of course, but doing the work of pleasure, realizing that I'm worthy of, sexual, sensual pleasure, but also like, I'm worthy of like enjoying my meal or enjoying this song, unlocked self-love for me. Like that. So for me, that's why I was attracted to this work. Like, yes, it's incredible with partnership. Everything you said, I'm like, yes, 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 yes. And for me, I did all of the self-help work, and I continue to, because I love it. But it didn't like hit like that spot, because it was like such a raw nerve. Like I could do all the gratitude, like I could do all the self-help work, but like that, standing eye to eye with like my stuff around sexuality was like, oh, like that was a portal for me to really take into my personal growth journey.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I mean, a friend once said to me, they said, being really truly confident is that you can stand naked, not necessarily in public, but you can be naked, in your own home, and be completely okay with who you are, with nothing on. And if you're truly confident, that's you will feel centered in that experience. And another friend, she talked about, because she had lots of surgery, she had I've forgotten the medical term, but her breasts were removed because she had some possible cancer there, had lots of scars on her body, and the partner that she was with, who's now become her husband, that was her moment of truth. She wrote about this being, she stood there naked, with her back to him, and was waiting to hear, whether the door was going to slam, whether he was going to run out or not. And as she said, he said to her, he said, I don't see any scars. I just see a beautiful woman. But she had the confidence, it was her way of finding that confidence. And that's part of what I'm talking about with that level of intimacy with someone, you have that confidence within yourself that you can be truly just you with that person. And to me, that's what that sexual experience comes down to. It's not, it's not just, bonking. I'm going to keep it clean here, not use the F word, because I don't want to have to put the explicit thing on the
I know, like not
where
another
it can
podcast
go. I mean,
me.
I'm okay with swearing, but it limits where it can actually be distributed. So, but it's not just that, getting it on. There's so much more when you truly experience that. But it's really about being, from what I understand, is about being, or from my experience anyway, about being truly you, about being completely vulnerable to being you, and sharing that with somebody.
Yeah. And I think, again, I mean, we could go in so many conversations about this, but like our society glamorizes performative beauty, performative sexuality. So like actually having a relationship to your sexuality rocks all of the, like, this is what I should do, this is what I'm taught to do. Like it's our true essence. And it shakes us of like, oh shoot, like what it really brings out, what is my truth, versus what I should be doing, what's cute, what's hot, what's celebrated. It's raw. It shakes you to the core.
It's raw. It's to your core. Yeah. And if you can let go, you have this amazing, amazing experience, which from my experience, that nothing compares to that. Is being completely raw with another person, completely vulnerable, and then the release that comes from that, just it's wild.
It's great.
How do you take people through that that awareness? If someone comes to you and says, I've got, I want to discover that, how do you bring people through that?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking too, this is a sidebar, again, ADD, but like I talked about this recently in a class that I led was, it's really easy to love ourselves when we're hitting all of the marks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like when I have the money, when I'm in the weight that I'm, my goal weight, like whatever, when I just got the Botox, whatever it is, fill in the blank for you, like,
yeah.
It's really easy to love that version of us.
Yeah.
But like that, we're cyclical. You know what I mean? Like we're going to be all the different, like our body changes, we change.
Yeah.
So this work has been so profound for me for loving and meeting myself at those different stages.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's consistently welcomed different versions of myself, different, where my body is. So I know that was like a side tangent, but what did you ask again?
I was asking you, like when someone comes to you and has that, they want to work on that space. They're going, okay, I want, because that is a space you work in. You're working in sex, love, and relationship coach. When someone wants that more in-depth experience with their partner, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I do. So we do that one-on-one work, and to which everyone's comfortable. Some people have been doing this work for years, and they're like, I have some people that are like, if I lead a meditation, they could jump right in, and they could tell me, oh, this is what came up. And some people have trauma, and they're like, Erica, I don't feel safe to close my eyes.
Yeah,
I don't feel safe to touch my arm, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. So like, I can't have an agenda. I have to meet people where they're at. Like, okay, you want to go full in today and like dig up old stuff? Cool. Or like, you don't even want to close your eyes today? Okay, cool. Yeah. So I have to facilitate where people are at, while also holding their desire for where they want to go with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does completely. Do you want to talk a bit more about the services that you offer for the audience? Just give them, what are those key services you offer? How to contact you, that kind of thing.
Of course. So like I said, like I'm literally obsessed with speaking gigs. So it's like I'm obsessed. So that's what makes me thrilled. So I do tons of different speakings. I do some, a lot virtual for corporate, yoga studios, whatever it is. I come in, and we didn't really talk about this, but I actually go for, like I said, corporate, for schools, and talk about mental health, and tailor it obviously to each different place. Sexual empowerment's obviously for one place, mental health is for a different category. But speaking is my jam. I'm obsessed with speaking. I love speaking. So if you're like, hey, I want to bring this crazy lady in, that's open. But for more one-on-one work where we really can get into the confidence, the embodiment, the sexual empowerment, like I said, I have one-on-one spots open. I'm obsessed with free gifts because I think everyone should have access to this work. I don't think it should be for just a privileged few. So I have 3 free resources. One is a free ebook. It's super short, lots of good tools. I have my podcast, Welcome to the Wagner Life. And then I have a free 60-minute session that like genuinely is a free 60-minute session. Yeah. If we work together, great. If we don't, great. Like that's just to have people feel held. And all that's on my website, which is www.wethelight.org, www.wethelight.org. And you can get all the free call, all the things, the book, the podcast, all the resources.
Fantastic. Yeah. And we'll put all those details in the show notes as well so people can contact you directly. Before we wind up, can you leave the audience with your, if there was a takeaway or takeaways that you wanted to share and it was like something fundamental that you wanted to share, what would those takeaways be?
Ooh, I love that. Okay. My big takeaways are, I think I feel like something that I pulled from this conversation is like nuance / that we're meant to hold it all. So what I mean is, in one hand, we can hold go with me on this. We can hold the trauma of, oh my gosh, my neighbor was murdered, and I'm still processing. Years later, I'm still processing that. And also in the same hand or on the same token, I also could be confident, I could be radiant, I can express my truth. And I think sometimes with this work, there's a disillusion that we have to be perfect, we have to be fully healed, we have to be fixed, like we're not broken.
Yes.
So I just want to kind of normalize that, like, we're all of it. And usually all of it comes up in one day. You know what I mean? You could be so alive and radiant, and later that day you could have a good cry over something. And that's normal. So I just want to normalize like the human experience, because sometimes in the self-growth world, we don't. It just should look like shiny and white Mercedes and eating kale and being in yoga all day, you know? And I'm like, that's part of it. I love that. And there's also 300 other sides of us that is welcome and celebrated.
I really love that, Erica. This part of it, we can be juxtaposed, and that's okay.
Yes.
But I am going to add that word to kale.
It's perfect.
I love Erica. It's been such a pleasure. I know you've got to run, but it has been such a pleasure having you on the show. So wonderful, and hopefully look forward to catching up again in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.